Hello everyone and welcome to the homework review video for week 6 mathematics. This week we were using your Wild About Maths book and we were looking at multiplying and dividing fractions, starting on pages 28 and 29. So to multiply a fraction, you have to multiply the top numbers, which are numerators, of each fraction together, and also the bottom numbers. These are called the denominators. So in this example, we have 4/7 times 3/8. So we do 4 times 3, which is 12, 7 times 8, which is 56. So we get 12/56. We can then simplify that to 3/14, and that's simplified to its lowest terms. Simplifying, we simply find a common factor and divide both the numerator and denominator by that common factor. If we want to multiply by a whole number, we simply turn that number into a fraction. So 4/5 times 3, for example, becomes 4/5 times 3/1. That represents 3 wholes. 4 times 3 again is of course 12, and 5 times 1 is 5. So we have 12/5. This is an improper fraction, where the numerator is bigger than the denominator. Now, what's lovely about our Wild About Maths book is we have various interesting animal facts as well that you can enjoy. So this section tells us about the water snake, which is exciting. So, task 1, can you multiply a fraction by a fraction, multiplying the tops, then the bottoms, and simplify? Now, the answers are on another page, so I'm just going to type them in as we go, which I think will be a bit easier. Oops. So, 2/3 times 4/7. So here you would do the 2 times 4, which is, of course, 8. And then you would do the 3 times 7, which is 21. So 8 21s. And that is as far as we go with that one. Now for B, we have 5/6 times 2/5. That ends up being, of course, 5/6 times 2/5. That ends up being, obviously, 10/30, which we can then also simplify to become 1/3. So remember, to simplify, you are finding a common factor that goes into both the numerator and denominator, and this can then be divided. The numerator and denominator can be divided by that same common factor. I've got to get my words out today. So C, 3/4 times 4/6. Of course, 3/4 is 12. And 4/6 is 24, so 12/24s. Now, this can be simplified down to a half. And what you should notice about any fraction that is equivalent to a half is that the numerator is always exactly half of the denominator. That is always going to be the same for equivalent fractions to a half. And finally, we had 6/9 times 2/5. And that is, of course, 12/45, simplified to 4/15. So I'm not going to go through the whole process of dividing each one, but just so that you recognise you're finding a common factor that goes into both times tables. So multiplying fractions is fairly straightforward. Now we're multiplying the fraction by a whole number. So remember, all we do with this one, 2 times 2/6, for example, is put that 2 over a 1. So it becomes 2 over 1 times 2/6. And that ends up being 2/3. And B, 1 over 1, 1 whole, times 7/8. And that is literally just 7/8, because of course whenever we times anything by 1, it's the same answer because we're not timesing it by anything else. We're not adding anything else to it. 4 times 2 fifths, so that's 4 times 2, and 5 times 1. This would be 8 fifths, or we can go into a mixed number fraction, and I might just write this one down. That would be 1 and 3 fifths, because of course 5 fifths make a whole, and then we would have 3 left over from 5 to 8. So 8 fifths is an improper fraction where the numerator is bigger than the denominator. Turning into a mixed number, you have 1 and 3 fifths. It's the same value, just represented in a different way. So D 3 times 9 tenths is 27 tenths, or 2 and 7 tenths, that could be. Let's also write that down. So the process of turning a mixed number into an improper fraction is seeing how many times the denominator can go into the whole number, which is of course 2. And then you have 7 left over in this case. So 2 lots of 10 are 20, and then there are 7 tenths left over. So 27 tenths, you can obviously see it's got the same value then as 2 and 7 tenths. 2 times 4, 6. This is E. This is 4 thirds, or 1 and a third. Nice and easy one to see there, obviously. 3 thirds make a whole, then you've got 1 third left over. And then 6 times a third for the last one, F. We've got 6 thirds, or of course 2. And why is that 2? Because of course 3 thirds make 1. We've got 6 thirds, so we have exactly double, and that's equivalent to 2. And task 3, these are mixed questions based on what you have just been learning. So 8 ninths times 8 tenths. Can I type this, or do I have to write it? Let's have a look. So 32 45ths. So literally 8 times 8, 9 times 10, and simplify. Oh, 45ths. B, you have 4 fifths times 8. This gives us 32 fifths, or 6 and 2 fifths. I'll write it up here, that's better. Hopefully you can see the difference between the mixed numbers and improper fractions. C, 4 ninths times a half. This gives us 2 ninths. I'm just going to write it. 5 twelfths times 6 is 15 sixths, or 2 1/2. And then under here, 2 1/2. This is of course 12 sixths. Then we have 3 left over. 3 sixths is equivalent to a half. E is 3 fifths times 8 twelfths. That actually gives us 2 fifths. And 5 sevenths times 3 is 15 sevenths, or, just write it there, 2 and 1/7. Of course, 2 lots of 7 is 14, and then we've got 1 left over to make the 1/7 left. Hope that is making some sense to you. So fractions can be quite confusing, but then once you have the basic principles, they do become easier to understand. Task 4, what is the missing whole number or fraction? So you are having to work backwards through this problem using the inverse operations. So 6 twelfths times something gives you 18 twelfths. Obviously 6 times 3 is 18. So it would have been 3 over 1 then. 12 times 1 would be 12. So the missing number was 3. It was a whole number that needed to be done. B, 4 times 10, 4 tenths, sorry, times something equals 24 tenths. So you have to think, what is going to be multiplied by 4 to make 24? And again, it's a whole number here. It needs to be 6. And we would do 6 over 1, which so 10 times 1 would be 10. And 4 times 6 is 24. C, something times 8 is 3256. So we need to put a fraction here because we know it's going to be multiplied by the whole number. Remember, if we had a 1 like that, that's how we know what the denominator would be, 456. 4 lots of 8 makes 32. And then we knew it had to be 456 as the fraction because as it's multiplied by a whole number, you can always imagine that whole number is going to be put over 1. So 56 times 1 is, of course, 56. D, again, we're going to need another fraction in this box. Something times 5 equals 45/60ths. Well, something times 5 makes 45. That is, of course, 9. And the denominator has to be 60. 9/60ths, because, of course, we're multiplying by a whole number. And that would be equivalent to 5 over 1. 5 ones, 5 wholes. 60 times 1 is 60. Again, we need a fraction here. Something times 3 equals 225/300ths. That is 75/300ths. So if you weren't sure, 225 divided by 3 will give you 75. And once again, the denominator has to stay the same. This one's going to be a whole number then. F, 16/20ths times something equals 32/20ths. 2 lots of 16 make 32. Well done. Moving on now, exploring further. Of a brood of water snake offspring, 3/5 were eaten by predators, and of those, 3/4 were eaten by raccoons. What fraction of snakes was eaten by raccoons? So 3/5 were eaten by predators. So there were 5/5 altogether. 3 of those fifths were eaten by predators. Of those 3/5, 3/4 were eaten by raccoons. So what we have to do is 3/5 times 3/4, and that will give us our answer. 3 times 3 is, of course, 9, and 5 times 4 is 20. So 9/20ths were eaten by raccoons. Poor snakes. Okay, moving on to pages 34 and 35. This was dividing fractions. Can be a little bit trickier sometimes, but remember, division is the inverse to multiplication. It's the opposite operation, the opposite process. And more confusing still, to divide a fraction by a whole number, you actually need to multiply. It's completely flipped the whole process of multiplying and dividing. So a half divided by 3 in this example is 1 over 2 times 3, which is 1 over 6, 1/6. So the numerator remains the same. You times the denominator by the whole number, and then you can simplify if you need to. We could think about it in pizza slices in this particular example for a moment. You can see there you've got 6 slices of pizza. Half of those slices is 3. 3/6. So if half a pizza is shared between 3 people, each person would get 1/6 of the entire pizza. Sometimes a visual example can be helpful. And this was rather nice. Task 1, colour. The correct answer, always like a bit of colouring. So this was pages 34 to 35. Let's get my highlighter. So 5/9 divided by 10. If we remember, go back to our example, the numerator stays the same and we would times the denominator by the whole number. So it would be 9 times 10, which is 90, 5/90. And then we would have to simplify that all the way down to 1/18. (24/5) divided by 16, so think about it in the same way. This comes down to 3/10. So remember, you're doing the operation, but the answers are being simplified. So a half divided by 4, that's 2 times 4, it's 1/8. And D, 3/5 divided by 6, so 5 times 6 is, of course, 30. 3/30. If we simplify that down, we get left with 1/10. Remember, to divide, to simplify, you find a common factor that can go in both the numerator and the denominator. And then finally, we have 7/8 divided by 4, and that leaves us with 7/32. And then divide these fractions, also remembering to simplify. I'm going to have to write them down, aren't I? So let's have a look. Get a pen back. 1/4 divided by 8. That would be 1/4 times 8, which is 32. And sometimes the answer, you get the answer straight away. You don't need to simplify. We can't simplify anymore in this case because the numerator was 1. So 1/32. Then we have 2/3 divided by 4. That's 2/3 times 4. That's 2/12. That can then be simplified, of course, to 1/6. I'm just going to put the little equal sign there to show you that's an equivalent fraction. There we go. Obviously, feel free to pause this video at any point if you want to just check your answers, or if you've made any mistakes, if you want to have another go at it now that you can see the method a bit more clearly. That's absolutely fine. So C was 6/9 divided by 5. We would do 6/9 times 5, which is 45. So 6/45. And then to simplify, we simply find a common factor that goes into both. We're going to divide the numerator and the denominator by 3. And that is going to give us 2/15. And that's as low as we can go. We can't divide it anymore. So 2/15 is that fraction simplified in its lowest terms, or simplest form, you might hear as well. Lowest terms, simplest form. Whenever you hear those words, that means you want to simplify the fraction as low as it can go. And that's really important when you're completing questions like this. If it asks you for the simplified answer, you must do it, as you may not get a mark if you haven't simplified it. 4/12 divided by 3, that would be 4/12 times 3, which is 36. And that can be simplified to 1/9. Hopefully my writing is clear enough for you. I'll go underneath for the bottom row. 6/10 divided by 4, that would be 6/40. And we can do that by half this time. so 3/20ths. And 3/7 divided by 4 becomes 3/28. We can't simplify that one. Right, I'm writing underneath now for G to I. 3/4 divided by 4. Where am I, G? That is 3/16. We don't need to do anything else with that one. 2/3 divided by 8. That's 2 over 3 times 8, which is, of course, 2/24. So again, we could divide this one by 2 to make 1/12. It's quite hard writing with a mouse. And then 4/5 divided by 7. That is 4/35. And there we go. That was task 2. Nearly done. Task 3. Look at the number sentence and circle whether it's true or false. 8/9 divided by 4 equals 2/9. That was true. You can do the calculation if you can't immediately see it, but some of them you might be able to see immediately. B was false. Let's just do that like that. C true. D was true. E was false. F was true. And G was false. Please feel free to pause again if you want to just check those in more detail. If you need to perform the calculations, that's absolutely fine. And finally, exploring further. You want to go with 3 friends to the riverbank to catch mud skippers. You share out 3.5 meters of net. How much of the net does each person hold? So you're going with 3 friends. That means there's 4 of you. So the calculation would be 3.5 divided by, that's not divided, just do that, divided by 4, and that equals 7 halves. And if we divide that by 4, then you get 7/8 of a meter. Okay, hope that has been helpful to you, everyone. Well done. I thought I'd come and sit down by my Christmas tree today. Quite pretty. I will see you next time for block 3.